Good evening, folks.
Evening.
Spring, summer, autumn, winter. Spring, summer,
Autumn. Winter.
spring,
Summer.
autumn,
Winter.
spring, summer, autumn, winter. Spring,
Autumn.
summer, autumn.
Winter.
Welcome, welcome, welcome tonight. Tonight you are here to hear the story of Gawain and the Green Knight. I, Jason Buck, will be telling the story, and Oliver Cross will be providing the music, traditional and synthetic. We'll start in a moment with the original, but first of all, shall we hear some hurdy-gurdy?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Oliver Cross! Now, we don't know who wrote Gawain and the Green Knight, and it may have been a very, very old oral story that had been transmitted from mouth to ear to mouth to ear to mouth to ear for years, decades, or possibly centuries. But it was written down about 700 years ago. It's not the oldest piece of English literature, but it is one of the oldest stories that we have. And as you know, there's been many films made of it, a film recently which... but people like to reimagine it. But we're going to start this evening with a little flavour of what it might have sounded like in its original form.
Sithen the siege and the assault was seized at Troy, the Burg Britain and burnt upon as an Askes. The tulk that the trammers of treason there wrought was tried for his treachery, the truest on earth. It was Aeneas, the Athol, and his higher kind, that sithen the priested provinces and patroners become. Well nech of all the well in the West Dales, Frovish Romulus to Rome riches him swathe, with great bourbons that burg he biggers upon first, and knowing as hit his own and home, as hit now hat Tisius to Tuscan and Teldus beginners, Langobardy and Lombardy lifters up homers, and fared over the French flood Felix Botus, or many bonkers full broader Breton he set us with wind.
Thank you. Listen, there we go. We won't be doing the whole thing in its original version tonight. But that's the and you can hear some of the words in there. You can get he was a traitor, and I don't know, there was a lot of babonkers and words in there. But the story starts with an old belief that after the siege of Troy, which is the very first words, that Aeneas, the Greek hero, and his companions were scattered out throughout the world, and Romulus went down to Rome, and Brutus came to England, and it was Brutus that set up England when there were giants still in this land. But Brutus wasn't the greatest of kings. I'm sure that some of you have not even heard of Brutus. But of all the greatest kings of England there have ever been, there is one whose name echoes down the century, and that is the name of King Arthur. So let us set the scene for you. It is Christmas. It is Yuletide in King Arthur's court. This is Camelot, and in the court there is the king himself. Young Arthur sat upon his throne, and there arrayed around him are tables and tables and tables full of noble men and noble women and of his famous knights. It is time for the Yuletide festival. The first of the food to be brought out. The first course was heralded with trumpets and drums and brought out into the room, and there were so many silver salvers and dishes laid out upon the table that there was not room upon the cloths to put them all. There were double portions set for all, for the new year was only 1 day old. But Arthur had a rule, a custom, that he would never eat until he had either heard a story of a marvel, of an adventure, or whether some challenger would come and face his knights and challenge them to a duel. Already throughout the day, those knights, those men of chivalry, had been jousting with their long lances out in the field, and all day they had been fighting and making merry, and now all sat down in Camelot Court. And if Arthur was not to eat, then none of the others would eat until he had raised a morsel to his mouth. And as they sat there, and as Arthur looked around the room, waiting for a tale or a story, or waiting for a challenge, a mighty deed, another sound was heard. The sound of hoofbeats, the sound of clattering horseshoes, and those great doors to that throne room were heaved open. And into that great courtroom came a figure on horseback. Mighty he was, broad-backed, broad-shouldered, so large and long of leg that he must have been half giant, or at least the tallest man alive. But as well as being large and strong, his hips and waist and shoulders were slim, but it was not his physical size, his physical presence, that made people look and stare and glance and gasp. But it was his colour, for his skin was green. Green was his skin. Red were his eyes like holly berries, and his hair that fell in curls upon his shoulders and down him like a mantle. His hair was green, and so was the great beard that poured upon his chest. All his clothing, his vestments were all of green. Everything he wore was green and stitched with such dainty details, with birds and butterflies in gold thread and decorated in green gems. And even the steed he rode was green itself. Green flanks and forelocks, and its mane and tail were green, and plaited in such curious knots and threaded with gold wire and with green gems. Even the saddle upon which this great knight sat was green. Green with studs of green enamel hammered along it, and decorated in gold, and spurs of gold. And in one hand he carried a holly branch, a symbol of peace, a symbol of life. When all the other trees of winter, the boughs are bare, the holly still bears its leaves and bears its berries. A symbol of peace and life in one hand, but in the other he carried a great axe. Huge it was in construction, and even its blade, its great curving blade of green steel, was in length an ell. Now I know you all know how long an ell is, but this is the length of an ell, because that is where the elbow comes. So Cupid, yeah, you can have that. You can tell your friends if you want to put that in the Christmas tree. The blade was an ell in length, a huge, great curving axe made of green steel and studded with gold and green nails and wrapped in thonging, tied around under tassels at the end, a great and powerful weapon in its other hand. And then other people entered King Arthur's court. Slowly and furtively they came in, looking for seats at the table. Are there any seats at the back? Where have people got a couple of seats? At the back. Furtively they crept towards the back, full of the shame and the knowledge that they would have to sing a Christmas carol at the interval. Vast this axe was, huge symbol of power and threat. But the man himself was dressed in soft clothes, and he was not wearing plate armor or a chain hauberk, a chain mail shirt. And as he rode his horse around the room, he rolled his eyes at the knights arranged around the table and called out, booming to those gathered, "Who is the governor of this place and of this feast? I would meet him." And the voices fell into silence, some because of the awe and fear this vast green knight inspired, and some out of courtesy, for they would let their liege king speak. And as all looked up to the throne, young Arthur, sitting in his throne, called out, I am King Arthur. This is my court. You are welcome. Come in, knight, come in and join us. Eat and drink and join in our festivities." But the knight said, "No. I have not come here to spend a while or waste some time." "Then what for?" said the king. "For by your axe I see you have come for a challenge." "Indeed I have, but I have not come here to fight. I have armor and sword and shield and helm at home, but if I had come here hasped today and that, I look around and see these so-called knights arrayed, but they are just beardless, bum-fluffed bands of boys." This is literature, this is culture. "If I was to challenge them to a fight, there would be No challenge to me, no, he said. I offer a game, a Yuletide game. And my offer is simple. A cut for a cut. I will allow anyone to take my axe, to take this giza, as they would have called it, to take this great axe. And with one blow they may attempt to hack my head from off my shoulders. And they may keep the axe if they take up my challenge, theirs to keep for always. But there is one condition, and that condition is that I may be allowed to return that blow. He dismounted from his horse and stood there, now holding his axe before the company, regarding Arthur and regarding the knights, all of whom turned their eyes down in shame, as they did not want to take up this chance, this challenge from this strange fairy knight. What? What? This is Arthur's court? Has valor vanished? Here I am, one man, just one man, and I challenge you, and all of you quake and refuse to play my game. This must be a place where honor and valor are merely talked of, but never seen. And at those words, Arthur's cheeks blushed and burnished red. He stood up and said, "What you ask is foolish. But if you have come seeking folly, then folly I will give you. I will take up your challenge, I will take your axe, and I will hew your head from off your shoulders." And walking down from the dais, down into the court amongst the tables, Arthur took the great axe from the vast Green Knight, and he swung it a few times experimentally to get its weight. At the high table, where Arthur had been sitting, on one side was his wife Guinevere, and has there ever been a fairer woman than Guinevere, and her grey eyes, her hair woven with jewels, and on the other side Bishop Baldwin, and along out to the outsides knights of great renown. But sitting close was Arthur's nephew, Sir Gawain. And he stood up and said, "Your Majesty, my liege, please, please, let the game be mine. It's not right that you should take this game, that you should take this risk. I am the least valuable of all your knights. I am untested in battle, and I am only a knight of the Round Table by virtue of being your nephew. I would be the least loss to your court. Let me take up the challenge. Let me take up the axe." And Arthur and the court agreed. And as Arthur handed over that axe to Gawain, he said, "Be careful, Gawain. You have but one cut. Make sure there is no chance of him returning it afterwards." Gawain walked towards the knight and said, "Sir, if I am to cut your head from your shoulders, I should know your name and your home, your land, so that we may send word to your people. You know of me all you have need to know," said the Green Knight. "After you have made your cut, if I am able, I will tell you who I am and where my home and land is." And with that, he bent his knee and swept his hair aside to allow his bare neck to be shown. Gawain took a stance with his left foot forward and hefted that great axe up over his head and brought it down with such force that it cut through the skin, through the clear white fat, and through the bone and through the neck entirely, and buried itself in the stone of the throne room floor. But the knight did not fall. His head rolled across the floor and bumped under the table and was fended off with the feet of the noblemen as they kicked it along. And blood poured from the stump of the great knight. But then he stood. Then he stood with his neck, the stump still fountaining blood, and went to where his head lay upon the floor, and bent down and picked it up by the hair, and showed his own head to the court, and showed it to Arthur and Guinevere, and then it mouthed these words, Gawain, you must find me in a year and a day. You have earned your New Year knock, and as our contract states, I am to give it to you, a cut for a cut. You must come and look for me. Come and find me. I am known as the Knight of the Green Chapel. And when you find me, in a year and a day, I will take my right to that second strike. Come, Gawain, you may spend the year sitting in comfort or in seeking me, but come and find me, or else be called a coward.